Welcome. We are back. My name is Fabian Westerheide. I'm an entrepreneur and investor with a passion for artificial intelligence. This is our Rise of AI virtual chat. This is a series of conversations with AI thought leaders and entrepreneurs and investors and people, on the policy side or on the, execution side, people who understand AI, who help us to teach AI and help us to adopt AI. The overall mission is to build a European AI ecosystem. That's why we do this. That's why I invite very interesting people every week here. That's why you join us here today. This is episode 17. This is live. If you have questions, you can use the questions function in Swapcard. You can use the polls and answer them. Please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do about AI, if you're here new or if you're a returning guest. This is also will be a podcast at a certain time, and you can watch the replay anytime on YouTube when we have finished this today. So what do we talk about this episode? Episode 17. Well, I will talk with my guest about expectations and reality. Where's AI coming from? Where are we today? Where we'll be? What is like reality and truth? And for this, as usual, I point out to my t-shirt, which is a good indication for, what we expect and what really works. He called it, our guest, end-to-end. So we will talk about integration and use cases, about regulation and standards. And my guest for this is Dr. Christian Guttmann. You can't put him in a single word, like you can't describe me with a single word. I call him an ecosystem builder. He is one of us involved in many, many different roles, and he's into AI for years. He is originally from Germany. He grew up in Australia. He lives in Sweden. He studied psychology, but did his PhD in distributed multi-agent systems already 22 years ago, I think. And that means he has a very diverse background. He comes from the brain side plus AI side. I think this is highly interesting. He's a professor of AI still in Australia. He is the founder of the Nordic AI Institute, which is more an ecosystem involvement. But he's also recently the Chief AI Officer. I tried to find a shorten for this. I like it. Chief AI Officer at TietoEVRY, which is a software infrastructure consulting company in the space. So these are enough words. You can talk with Christian about everything, and you will like him. We like him. That's why he's here today. Welcome, Christian.
Hey, hello. Great to be with you.
Good.
Fantastic.
So let me have a look at the chat. Wow. People introduce themselves. Hello to everyone. Wonderful to have you all here. Christian, give us a brief and not a detailed description. What are all your activities in the AI ecosystem?
A brief description about all the activities. Okay, an oxymoron. But hey, look, I'm super excited that the AI is really picking up now to such a large extent. So you see activities across the board. So I would say the activities that I'm involved in mostly is a lot around business. So how do you actually make the different companies that we have in Europe and the Nordics become AI first companies? How do they become aware of what AI can offer to them? So there's a lot happening there. So with my team here at TietoEVRY, we're looking at a lot of those types of opportunities. So that's one big thing. You mentioned ecosystem builder. So it's I think it's a good description in many ways because, well, before we start really building out and making many companies AI ready, you also need to build the right, let's say, frame, right? The right infrastructure. And so that leads me often to discuss these topics with government officials, travel to Brussels before COVID a couple of times, talk to commissioners and a number of people as one example, right? And how do you lay out, what's the framework? And I think at least you're aware, and many others perhaps are aware in the call, there's different AI regulation proposals, data strategy proposals, product and liability, that all shapes the ecosystem, right? And then, of course, I'm very active. Look, there's so many new startups in this space. There's so many new initiatives. I'm more than happy. I'm a startup advisor and angel investor. So it's great to see these new companies popping up and pushing the boundaries. So I guess that's sort of in short. And then, of course, maybe one more is, of course, the being in the academic world. So I'm, as you mentioned before, I'm still in the academic world. So pushing that and being at the cutting edge. Super exciting.
So what I like about you, you have this holistic view. You are in a large corporation, 24,000 people, but it's IT company. You have startups, you are teaching, you're lobbying. You're a public speaker. I mean, you've been at Rise of AI conference before. You will be at our summit this year in an even larger role. You know, we're trying to involve you building this. And you have seen the whole ecosystem for quite a while. Tell us your feeling, like, where has it been like 10 years ago? Where is it today? Like, what surprises you? Did you see it coming? And what came where you say, oh, I didn't see this 10 years ago? And where do you say, hey, 10 years ago we were expected this and we're still not there yet?
Yeah, I would say personally, yeah, I always expected it. I guess it was in my, DNA somehow, because I believe in that topic so much. So it's a very exciting topic. But if you look back 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? If you start with 10 years ago, I think you saw already the application of AI tools, particularly machine learning. I myself built a fair bit of those types of technologies. But of course, this major uptake, and it's probably more a realization of technology that has been around for some time, the realization of many companies that you can create a huge amount of value in a short amount of time. Like the big companies, the big e-commerce companies from the US particularly, and also from Asia, they just have recognized, this pattern matching. It's just so valuable to start personalizing ads and feeds and all those types of things. So I think that what I didn't foresee is that there's such a big realization and understanding of what this technology can do. And but AI has been around, and I think another point to mention is that in some sense AI has always been around, right? But when I was in business, I don't mention the companies, but we couldn't quite call it AI. So it was unsexy. People ran away from it. It's too esoteric, and we called it often intelligent systems, smart cities, analytics. You gave it all sorts of words which were, let's say, more in German salonfähig, so you would be able to talk about them and don't scare people away, let's say. So it has always been around and has developed all the time.
I understand this feeling that AI emerges a new term. I mean, Alan Turing spoke about AI, etc. And then, it's science fiction. I came from the science fiction era. I mean, I always like to tell, the first Rise of AI meeting was called Berliner Futuristen. It was 10 people meeting in a hacker space, which was a spaceship. And we talked about the singularity might be close. Honestly, it's not close. I don't know if we will make it by 2045. Then my first AI conference was AGI Conf. So AGI is a very old format where Ben Goertzel introduced the first time Sophia, which later became Sophia the robot. But the first prototype, I saw it like 4 years before it went live in TV. For me, this experience is I saw this really nerdy topic where everyone was applauding because he built a robot who acted in real time. And then 4 years later, it's in TV, and you see pictures with Jimmy Kimmel, and you see Angela Merkel talking to this, and it hit mainstream. But it did not improve in technology. It just became awareness mainstream. So where do you see, like, integrations there? I would say technology is only solving 1% of the problems, 99% is still execution. And we will talk about this 99% soon. But where do you say, like, is the disillusionment? Like, where are we heavily missing, and where did we overachieve it? Like, what can we be proud of as an ecosystem?
Yeah. I was just looking at the background change that you had. So does that mean it's enlightenment? No, it's like
yes, it's hope. It's hope that it will, but we have many pathways to go.
Yeah. No, good. Yeah, look, I mean, I can just say, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Sophia as per se, and I think and it's in part related to the second part of your question, the disillusionment, or, getting a bit of a different sense of what reality is. But let me say this, I mean, science fiction is a very powerful tool, right? So because we humans, when you can imagine it, you can build it, right? So you have, and when you look back, a lot of those science fiction ideas, they have been driving the community towards building it, right? I mean, and it's also like, if you want, these are the early use cases, when you look at Jean-Luc Picard and the way he talks to the star, to his ship. Yeah, so, you can imagine it, or I don't know, Knight Rider for lack of a better example here, but, but you have, you get a bit of a sense. And then actually it might be I might be deviating a little bit, but I think the good thing about science fiction, and Robert Heinlein, he was one of those big science fiction writers, Asimov, Heinlein, they were all in the same category, and he was very, very clear that there's science fiction and fantasy fiction. And science fiction, from his point of view, is always based on scientific thinking and theory. Mm-hmm. And fantasy fiction are things that have no basis in science.
It's magic. So mostly it's magic and it's
mythical. Yeah, it's along those lines. Exactly. When you start having fairies and so on, So, but I mean, that's just word. I just, read a bit about the.
But again, to the question.
Yes.
And I will point out questions. Yes, I will repeat that.
Go for
what can we be proud of? Like, everyone here is in the AI space, more or less, but we always don't have always a timeline. What is an achievement where we can say, good, from my view, funding, it exploded, like it coming from very small level, exploded. When I started 2014 with Asgard, I had 4 or 5 AI companies in Berlin. Today we have over 200, so from 4 companies to 200 companies.
Yes.
Politics improved a lot. I mean, for Angela Merkel, our chancellor, internet was Neuland. Today she talks about AI. I mean, it's another jump too. I mean, we have an AI strategy. It's the first time that we have something. What other things where you say, hey, this worked out, it's good, it's an uptick?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I would say it's the increased, from my perspective now, there's a certain level of maturity. The types of discussions that I'm having, the interests in the sector, let's say the CXO levels and the board of companies, there's much more happening there in terms of thinking and really feeling pushed, the fear of missing out, so it becomes a much more tangible topic, right? And I had a very good discussion with the chairman of Nokia, who I think is quite known for actually having taken an action rather than talking theoretically about the topic. He went to the US and actually learned about it, right? So you start having this maturity of understanding in the business suite, and that of course generates more testing environments. So I think the number of proof of values, proof of concepts, has gone up, and I think it is important. It's a very important part. You need to really iteratively get into this topic, and I think we see a big uptake there. And of course, funding, as you said, I'm looking a bit from the perspective of what type of startups and, companies and the public sector, what type of funding they are receiving these days, right? Because that's so important for them to start testing. And so we see a big uptake there. And I mean, another measure, it's now the number of PhD students, for example, that are in this space. It's like explosion, right? So everyone wants to learn about it, which is good. Yeah, it's great. And so there's a lot also approaching me, which is great. So keep doing that, and that's a good thing. Many in our company, in our customers' environment, many of them have a very high ambition, right? So they really want to get into it. They see it, and it often comes from the technical engineers, right? The technical folks, they really start getting their teeth into it. And they ask me a lot, what should I learn? What courses should I do? What books should I read? So you see a lot there. And I think, maybe we come later to it, but it's of course all about breaking it down to what value it creates, right? What sort of business does it create? No matter you enter the SM, it always needs to be turning into.
So more technical people go into it, more researchers, more funding, more startups, more integration. On the other hand, what doesn't work? And as I said, we still have problems like this. Yes, the machines are coming, and we still have challenges from not enough data, not labeled, not quality. We can have improvements in usability. Yes, this is still missing a lot. It's not. So I would say the largest challenges is one. First, expectations by mass media. Oh, it's like Ex Machina, it's like Terminator. No, it's not. It's honestly very, 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 very far away from this. It's very dull, it's very boring if you really think about AI. It's technically exciting, but it's storytelling boring. Yes, and the most exciting thing is a Twitter bot which gets racist, like attention-wise. That was human fault. I think we have learned a lot about ethics. This I didn't have on my roadmap 6 years ago, that we will discuss so much about bias system, moral machines, robust AI, explainability. That wasn't on my roadmap. I think that's very huge and will be a huge topic. And what I didn't expect it will take so long is integration into companies and businesses. So Google is fast, Amazon is fast, TikTok is brilliant fast. They want to buy it just for the algorithm. But then if I look at Siemens, I was very surprised. But if I look at the rest of corporate world, Mittelstand, Very, very slow, very slow. And I think that's why I think it's good that you are here and that you do what you do, and that we'll talk a little bit about this. How can we bring AI more into on the street? But this is like where I say, hey, we are not in a winter, but it's autumnish. In the time, it's getting colder, it's less hype, more realistic. Now prove what you can do.
Exactly. Now you brought up a lot of very interesting points here, right? So where to start?
Please.
Which one to bring up?
Let's start with yeah, what's missing, what's not optimal. If you think it's getting winter and autumn, or if just being spring all the time.
Yeah, I think we might be in spring for a little while longer, and I think the reason is that there's so much application, so many application opportunities yet, right? I mean, when you compare winters of AI in the past, in the 70s and the 80s, it was in the 80s and in the 60s, right? It was more that people discovered some technological limitations they didn't understand at the time. But now it's really like a slow, I would say it's a reasonably slow uptake, right? And so we are in spring. I think the excitement is there. I see when I'm talking to customers now across the board, whether it's manufacturing or retail or, healthcare and so on. I mean, you see the ideas around use cases and application cases with values bubbling, right? There's more awareness. People have more awareness, right? And so this is also to the point of what type of culture and mindset do you want to build. And then you mentioned, what was the topic again? Like what is not working? Or
Yes, like okay, integration is lacking, and that's slow.
Yeah.
What else
Yeah.
is not optimal? Like where you thought we would be further down, or where we got stuck. For example, for me, the ethical debate was way too high, and it was
Yeah.
not enough debate about how do we get it on the street, how do we build an ecosystem, how do we make it real.
Yeah. I mean, look, what I'm seeing now is that we have to be always careful with, how do you want to call it? I mean, too much.
Be straight and honest.
Yeah, I try to say it, but I think there is, of course, value. I'm thinking of regulation, right? And I'm not saying that there should be any regulation. So I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm trying to choose my words very carefully here, right? But it should be very innovation-friendly regulation, which is coming in. And a regulation and a law is a reflection of our ethics and our values on the morale that we exhibit, right? So it's actually quite a complex scenario. And you mentioned psychology before that I studied. I mean, it's not a trivial thing to do. But we have to be, of course, a little bit careful that we don't put in lots of regulation about theoretical topics, right? I mean, if I compare that a lot, I think you also popped over to Silicon Valley and other places. But usually when you solve problems, you're not starting with, well, what are the problems and what should we be regulating, right? I mean, what should we not be doing? You should be thinking about what could we be doing? What are the opportunities? And if this is so, I feel sort of if this, and you need test grounds, right? And if this is going in the wrong direction, and you see that in those sandboxes in which you can experiment, well, then you should really think about, what type of regulation you might want to bring in.
For example, yesterday Germany upgraded its monopoly law to regulate Google, Amazon, etc., digital platforms more. For example, if Google is advertising themselves higher than their customers, not allowed to. It's interesting. They also say, for example, Amazon, the clients who sell stuff want to have contacts for their own clients, who pushes something. Amazon is keeping them, and then it's conflict. GDPR says, no, you can't forward this, but AI terms wise, you want to have the data and you want to have the benefits of it. So it will be very interesting to roll out. And I agree, it has to be done on the case. So,
And you mentioned something else. I remember you brought up so many very important topics, but for example, how do you make data accessible? Data is one factor, right? Not all, and this is something that some people misunderstand also, not all AI needs a lot of data, right?
True.
So there's one particular area, which is machine learning, and that area when it comes to pattern matching and so on. So that needs a lot of data as of today with the technology we have, like CNNs and RNNs and the neural networks, right? So that's one thing. And of course, that type of data, there's a lot of value having access to it. You mentioned the small or medium-sized businesses, and there is an issue that is bubbling up, which is how do you make these smaller companies, whether it's in manufacturing or elsewhere, how do you allow them to have access to this type of data to stay competitive? Because if you have these very large companies that can technically collect their own data about the manufacturing process, they might be sitting on their billions of data rows, right? But then you have a newcomer, right? A new startup that comes in, or a smaller business, and they want to improve their products or their sales. they are heavily disadvantaged. And I think there we need to be careful that we don't build these mega companies that have access to all this data. And this is in fact reflected in the discussions that I have.
I'm a big supporter of an open data system that you have like a Genossenschaft, like a union,
Mm-hmm.
where you pool your data and you anonyze it. The thing is,
Yeah.
B2B data is often not personal, so it's not about personal privacy. B2C is something else, so we can in B2B share way more data and have to do it. A couple of questions came from your statement. First one, you say not every AI solution needs a lot of data. Tell us what AI doesn't need a lot of data.
Oh, I mean, there's plenty of other topics. When you look at AI, right, it's divided into many different areas. Like you have, for example, what do we have? Robotics. Or I was thinking actually, even within machine learning, there's now a lot of research happening where you have this one-turn data or one or several turn data learning. So instead of having the system learn over millions and hundreds of millions of iterations, right, and having huge data sets, it would learn based on a type of common sense basis, just like you and I would learn something. So if I show you a new item like a pen or something, right, I show it to you once and you will recognize it next time, right? You don't need to see it like a million times in order for you to recognize it. So there's a lot of research there. Another one is deep reinforcement learning, for example, right? So even there, you need essentially one piece of feedback. You tell the system, well, that is wrong. Whatever you're doing, it's wrong. And so it learns based on that type of feedback. And this doesn't require a lot of data. It requires essentially one you did it well or you did it bad type feedback, right? So that's just within machine learning. And then you have, natural language processing. You have a big area called knowledge representation. It's often underestimated. But if you, for example, it's just a matter of how do you represent the data effectively, efficiently, not in databases, but for example, like LinkedIn, Facebook, these social media sites, they have topologies. So they connect people, and you have the connection, then the data is connected between
graphs.
Yeah, exactly. So there's many areas. And multi-agent systems, the area that I worked in, it's a lot about how do you make multiple AI systems work together, right? And so there you need to think about, okay, social choice theory, for example, multi-agent decision-making, group decision-making, which was part of my thesis. It's a very different.
And I say your idea will return in a couple of years. So I had a portfolio company with Asgard, which was called Accelerated Dynamics, and they had a swarm intelligence. So at the end, they were able to control hundreds of drones with one software. One order, this like do A, B, C, protect this area, and they did the pathway and everything together. And I love this, great idea, but they were 10 years ahead of time because industry and defense didn't have enough AI machines out there. They had like one drone and one robot. They didn't have hundreds. So they solved something which was too early. So your idea was even earlier, but it will return one day, I'm sure. I also felt that in research, what next step is to solve is common sense and transfer knowledge. Like both is missing. How do you want to teach an AI common sense?
I mean, this area has also been around for a long time. In the 80s, it started, right? So it's not something that just recently popped up. How do you teach an AI system common sense is a big question. But of course, some of the attempts, is essentially just start building a corpus of knowledge on which you can build, right? So
but that's an expert system.
What type of abstractions can you create from that, right? So what type of, let's say, stereotypes about the world can you extract? How can you, I mean, the whole idea behind common sense is a bit like, how can you see the connections in the background? How do things causally related, for example, right? So that you can think ahead. And just to name one good colleague of mine is Julia Pearl. You might have heard of him. He's extremely well known has made major contributions to uncertainty, probability networks. And when you hear him, right, he would say that all this machine learning is good and fine. You do you fit curves, good exercise, but you don't know the reasons why something happens, right? And he has been extremely known. He got the Turing Award and so on. And I mean, you gain a lot of benefit from understanding the causes between different actions about the world, and that gives you a basis to build some type of common sense, and that allows you then to essentially be much quicker. So you can throw AIs in the world that will understand the world quicker without massive
So my personal thesis is that all these pieces have to come together. For example, one portfolio company is called Microsoft Industries, and they're teaching robots to learn. So it's very similar. They see a human movement, and then they copy it, but the objects are each time different, so they just learn the idea of that's a ball, I grab it. They have to learn this, that it exists, and then they can do it with every ball, and they teach it and improve itself. So this is the direction where it's going, but it's just, as you say, it's not data intensive. They don't need a lot of external data. It's a lot of machine learning, building this world model, building this adapters to the world, giving this common sense and so forth. So it's very challenging to solve.
Yeah, exactly. And I talked to a guy in the, he was also one of those early veterans, the early pioneers. And I remember very deep discussions quite a while back, but, he was really demanding that when one claims they're doing AI or they publish a paper in AI, they should always state in the beginning how this work they are doing contributes to AI. And so AI is not just machine learning. AI is about building machines that are smart, more aware, conscious. They have common sense. They have a whole bunch of, let's say, what do you want to call it? Characteristics which we would associate with people, with humans, right? And so there was he was quite clear that is something you would expect in papers. But today it becomes a bit watered down, let's say, right? People throw themselves.
Honestly, AI doesn't fit because we don't speak about artificial human intelligence. I prefer, for example, machine intelligence, because at the end it's always a machine and it's intelligent in itself. So we have the first audience question for you. And it is from Saraf asking, is there a place for graphs, in particular knowledge graphs, in the current deep learning dominated AI landscape? And if so, what benefits does it add?
So first of all, I believe so, very much so. And in fact, there are a number of companies that are using them, these knowledge graphs. So now I'm not entirely sure which type of knowledge graphs you are meaning, if it's sort of semantic models or topologies about people, let's say. But they're certainly used in, as I mentioned before, social media like LinkedIn and Facebook and so on, the way you're representing information and knowledge.
I think Google Search too. Google Search is a very interesting knowledge graph system.
Yes. I think the knowledge graph and the knowledge representation is a big, let's say, topic, both in psychology, the way how we, memorize things and structure things. It's not a database. It's not just facts, that you're putting together. It's a lot about, how do you connect concepts? Yeah. So I think it's very important. And in terms of value, I mean, if you go a bit deeper from a technical perspective, it's simply that you can retrieve, there's many examples, but you can retrieve information much quicker, right? So if you were to want to take LinkedIn as an example, I don't want to make any particular advertising here, but if you want to search for someone, right? You see these degrees of which people are distant from you. And of course, that is something you can do significantly quicker by connecting or having a representation around the topologies rather than having a database. So there's a lot of savings in terms of search, and then of course you can detect patterns, right, in the way how people are connected with each other and so on.
So I agree. I would say it's even an old AI field, and it's strong there. It's not so popular like deep learning, sure, but let's be true. Deep learning is, for me, the reason why we are in this uptick again, why this became real, because it was rediscovered and it was the right tool for abundance of data and a lot of patterns and objection recognition. I think it pushed the whole domain a lot forward. And everyone out there, NLP and so forth, saying like, oh, we underestimated. You get more funding and attention too. Deep learning is not the only solution. We see it here, but it is a reason we should be thankful for deep learning. And now we continue with a whole bandwidth of technologies.
Yeah, fair enough. And exactly as you say, I think it's a realization of these huge benefits and values that you created. Once it became known how the big e-commerce companies did this pattern matching, right? And that you make essentially billions of dollars from that, and you can really map that and clearly see that, it became a no-brainer. I think that's really, you needed this catalyst. You needed to have this understanding in the system that realized, whoa, what's happening?
And I honestly, I enjoyed TikTok, very good algorithm. Pinterest, very good. Yes, Amazon, brilliant. Yes, Facebook, you mentioned. Facebook honestly sucks, but LinkedIn was really good. Recommendations, all this. I mean, it works really fine. I mean, happy with this. It can be more. My Siri is still like, it doesn't sound me right. Like each time I put in milk, it says something very random, and It's like, it's not optimal, but it is convenient. I enjoy going upstairs and saying like, Alexa, light on, Alexa, TV on, Alexa, shut it off. It's like cool. It feels a little bit like Star Trek on the ship, like computer, do this, do that. I enjoy it. So we said we want to speak a little bit about AI roadmap business. So let's take a little bit of time for this. How do you start? Like when do you say a company's AI ready means they should consider thinking about AI? What are the needs you have to have first before you say, no, you have a lot of other homework to do? Or yes, you should consider AI as a feature, product, strategy element.
Yeah. So let's break it down a little bit with a few questions, right? And then what I can do is sort of provide a bit of a vanilla approach, how could it be? And then in every of those 4 steps, there will be so many questions and issues coming up. But let's try to do it that way. And I think one of the first questions you need to be aware of, nice background picture, you would like to be aware of is okay, which company are you? I mean, you have to ask yourself which company you are today. And actually, I would be interested to know that to make some type of roadmap assessment. So are you, for example, a product or service company? Are you a B2B or a B2C company, right? So there are some very basic questions you need to review first, I would say, because that determines where you're going. And of course, also, which industry are you in? Is it private? Is it public? Which type of private are you in? Are you manufacturing, And let me also say that what I'm explaining now is really from the perspective of many, perhaps 89% of the companies that we have in Europe. I would give a very different type of advice if it was about startups.
Let's stay with B2B European company, and it can be in manufacturing, but let's assume B2B in Europe.
Exactly. So, but I just want to say that on the outset, right? So then, of course, you need to do a little bit of the homework. I think the first step is to really look at what are your ambition levels, right? Think about basic questions on your maturity. What company are you today? What identity do you have today? And when it comes to ambition levels, it's like with any good strategic question, what type of company do you want to be in 2 or 5 years' time, right? So that these are questions that you might want to ask yourself if you look at it from a leadership perspective, from the CXO perspective, from the board, right? If you have a bigger ambition, then of course, you want to see again, where you are, what success state you are defining yourself to be in. Looking at the competition, looking at what others are doing, what value are you offering to the system, and so on and so on. And then, of course, what type of capabilities do you need? So these are some strategic considerations that I think you need to ask yourself in the beginning. Then the next step, second step, is a lot about...
Okay, let's assume step 1, strategy and management focus.
Ambition levels, maturity, what's the outset? Where are you starting, right? And that can be any... I mean, this is a lot of discussions I'm having with many companies. Right, I talk to the CEO, I talk to some board members, the owners, right, of companies that are anything from, large companies. They have big revenue streams, right? But they are also, to be clear, they are not data natives, right? They are obviously.
Let me jump in here. When you talk and you have a feeling for the market, like how real, like startups, they are all about AI, but what would you say, like how much AI is really currently on your clients and non-clients? I mean, if they're a client of yours, they want to do something, but there's a huge dark market not contacting you. What do you say? Like,
well, I mean, if you look at let's call them, what do you want to call them? Established companies that have been around for decades or 100 years or something. It's still very limited, right? I mean, if you and then you talk about real AI, and there's another aspect in the first phase that you want to consider, which is clarity. What is actually AI versus business intelligence or analytics or RPA? Sometimes it's all thrown in the same pot, and it's very, very different, right? But it's quite limited. AI in my world has a lot to do with having autonomous systems that take these decisions, not just the dashboard that shows you what could be done, which is more analytics, but AI is, you have that system that does something. I mean, the typical example are self-driving cars, or when you have on Facebook or Google ads that are essentially presented automatically, right? There's no human that clicks, does something manually, but that's sort of, if you...
Strategy and goals, what's next? Like, okay, let's say I have a strategy, I want to use AI, I have an assessment and analyze the market and competition and so forth, but I realize, hey, we don't really do a lot of automated like this. We still have hundred thousands of humans who are stuck at home office.
Yeah, exactly right. Look, I mean, and also all the steps I'm mentioning, they don't have to go in a sequential way, but the second step that you need to consider, or the second point you need to consider, is really, well, how do you go about it, right?
Okay.
It's and usually one good start thinking, way to think about it is that you are looking at, well, what's most meaningful? What type of use cases what type of application scenarios are the most meaningful for the company? And I use the word meaningful because they don't have to be the most impactful. They don't have to be the ones that create the most value. They should also not be trivial, small 3-month sort of projects, right? But they should be projects which are showing some value, which convince many stakeholders in the organization, because you will have a lot of people that are not opening their arms to these types of technologies. In fact, the majority of people will not want to have that, they don't want to understand it, they don't want to embrace it. It's very complex. It's more on their daily task than what they would want to have, right? So you have that aspect. So having meaningful iterative sort of approaches. So, and iterative is also important. We recently discussed with the customer that it should be every small step we are taking should create some type of value to the organization. So that is something that is actually quite important to consider. I think that you are not jumping in. I mean, you can, and this is also proposed, and I have seen this as execution, that you are looking at the other side of the spectrum. Instead of doing it iteratively, you're actually doing it in a big leap. But then you have to talk to the owners of the company. You have to talk to the investors, and you have to tell them, guys, this year there's no dividend. There's going to be 20% less revenue. But we are putting ourselves up to be the business leader.
Anyone who did this bold leap?
There are 2 companies in the Netherlands. I can look up the name now. They don't come to my mind, but there's one that did that. They had a very thorough discussion, actually now 3-4 years ago, and they said, hey, we really turn this business around, and they had an agreement with the board and the investors to go this quickly. But I agree with you, that is not usually common. I mean, usually when you bring up that type of topic, as let's say the CEO or leadership team with the board and with the investors, they start looking for a new CEO potentially, So you have to be a little bit careful how you bring up these types of topics.
Okay. So for now, I understand. I mean, I could exchange it with blockchain and other technology. You need to convince the CEO, and then you need to convince the stakeholders within the companies to support your projects. Let's talk a little bit. Okay, let's say I have the support by the CEO. I have the stakeholders. I have a project with value. I mean, otherwise I shouldn't do it. It's a smaller one. It's iterative. How do I get started? Like, do I just hire a bunch of coders, or do I hire a project? Do I buy a company? Do I build it? Like, let's assume they say, hey, AI is cool, but I have no clue where to start. I would just know that we want to do something.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I mean, there's a lot of options then, right? So everything you're mentioning is, of course, on the board, right, as a choice. And I think I should also say everything I said so far is a bit top down, right? Talk to the CXO and the investors. That's an ideal situation. But of course, I strongly encourage the organization also to build things from bottom up. So there should be a lot of incentives possible for everyone anywhere on the ground that is working their way upwards, that show value in the system that way. But so how do you go about it? It again depends on what strategic decisions you have. Well, I can tell you what doesn't work, going back to some of the things, or let's say what is much less likely to work is, for example, this idea that you centralize all the AI activities in a company. I mean, that has been done, and I don't know any organization that has truly succeeded in it. So you centralize all the efforts, or you decentralize it completely. And by centralization, what I mean is that you have a type of, if you want to call it the center of excellence or what it is, but they own every single AI initiative. They own all the interactions with the customers and the product, and they are essentially responsible for bringing it forward. The reason why it doesn't work is that they often don't have all that knowledge that is at the edges, that's in the rest of the organization, right? So you cannot build a small team that really overlooks all the activities, right? And also, if you go with that approach, you need to give that type of team all the power to make these decisions and the changes in the organization, which is really tough. If you have a company of, let's say, 50,000 people and you produce whatever it is you produce, a car, a lawnmower, and then you essentially tell everyone else what to do. It's very, very close to impossible. decentralizing isn't a good idea, right? To just say, well, all initiatives, everything is welcome, everyone is doing their own thing. Because what happens then is that you're sort of reinventing the wheel over and over again. I mean, one clear example now is with the regulations that are coming in, the EU regulations and so on. That's something that I'm, for example, looking at a lot, but there is no point that the rest of the organization is getting themselves into this topic as deep as we are.
So let me ask there. For example, Siemens, Uli Waltinger 2 weeks ago talked about a very similar process, convinced the CEO and the business units. What they have is like a core team, like a research lab, but they have machine learning teams in each business unit. So they build the products very local, but the research is centralized in a certain way, and the support, they are like task force helping them. I spoke with SAP, and SAP has in research labs too, and it's similar. So I lost the thought there.
Maybe you wanted to ask. So I mean, I think there's, to be very honest, when you talk to Uli and Saab.
The question is, what would you centralize and what would you decentralize? Like what job levels should you have in your local team and what you don't? Like the researcher, for example, the coder, the ethics people, the regulation people.
Exactly. I mean, the good rule of thumb, and that's a bit how we think at TietoEVRY also, is that the centralized AI team is a bit the stem. So we're creating standards and practices that can be reutilized across the company. So as we are going in and spearheading certain projects with customers, let's say, how does that reapply in other parts of the organization, right? So who else can take it, and what parts of that learning that we have, can be useful and can also be easily adopted, right? So we sort of document and we write down what needs to be done, and we're also looking at the code and the assets that are built and so on. So building up a proper knowledge repository, let's say. So that's I think a good start. That's what we decided to do. Then of course, as I mentioned before, what should be decentralized there is essentially the connection with the customer and the existing ongoing projects. I mean, this is knowledge that is on such a detailed level. It should remain in the individual teams. It should be decentralized, right? I think there is no point to take over customer relationships and centralize them. You will be very quickly overwhelmed. And then, of course, you need to think about the different grades of skills that you would want to have centrally. It's maybe a little bit along the lines of what Uli mentioned, that you have research centrally, but I would go a bit further, a bit more expanded. I would say that that's how we internally call my team a bit. It's a bit the, I don't want to talk down anyone else, but we talk a bit the A team, like the ones that when we go in and we start looking at the really hairy projects, the things that are, let's say, non-standard, where customers start to want to have something which is not done before, right? And so we have our PhDs that have knowledge in a particular area, and they really apply themselves to that. So, I mean, these are like two big topics. I mean, we also, it might be worth mentioning, so that I could sleep nicely at night, I actually introduced the AI ethics principles and certificates in our company. And I think the certificates, we were the first company in Europe that introduced them. So everyone that's an AI and data scientist, although it's not legally binding, we are not legally required to do that as a company, but they are going through this certificate and are aware of what it means to build AI systems, their impact and so on. And so, yeah, that's something that should be done centralized. No point doing that. Like
2 questions from the audience for this. First is the idea of almost internal AI consulting company for enterprise effective? So if I understand it, should you build your own AI consulting team? Yes, I mean, Porsche Consulting, for example, is existing. VW Consulting is existing.
Yeah.
I would say yes, more than before, because you want to have the skill sets internal, and you need your own research unit, which you didn't have to do. About your view on this, because you are external.
Sorry?
You are external. You're not the internal guy.
You mean me?
I mean, you're internal consulting within your own corporation, but you go to clients and help them from external. So should they build the skill set on their own? Should they have their own AI consulting business?
Yeah, internal. And by internal, we mean they help other teams inside, right? So having a bit of supporting the other teams, essentially. Is that internal?
Other questions is like, when do you start to have AI skills within? your companies versus when you buy them. If you only have 10 people out there and you're a small shop, you just buy something per API. If you have 250 people, small manufacturing, I would consider this. If you have 5,000 people and more, you should have your internal AI team in various degrees. But your view?
Okay, so I'm still not 100% sure if I understood the question per se, but I mean, an internal team, if you are a company and you want to support the different areas in your organization, and you need to build up your business, then you have to ask yourself if it contributes. I think a good rule of thumb is, does it contribute to the core of your business? Does it contribute to the core of what you're doing, right? So that's one question. And if you are using that internal consultancy team as one that is supporting, and increasing and improving the core business and the value of that core business, then I think it is a good idea. Internal AI teams, if you are speaking about something like the COEs, then I think one thing you just need to be aware of, or want to be aware of, is that they are not responsible for things, or they get the mandate for things which are taking away the speed, of other teams. So you need to be quite careful how you're slicing the responsibilities and how you're giving the internal team, what type of tasks you give the internal team versus the rest of the organization. I'm not sure if I got that.
Yeah, I would say it's a tricky question. Like, when do you start to have buy or build? Like, that's a little bit my thing. So,
right. That's how. Yeah, right.
Pontus' second question is from Pontus. He asked, what would you say is the relative importance of technology versus people/organization when it comes to successful implementation or usage of AI in business?
Right. Okay. So there I can say quite clearly, it's the people. I mean, the people are a major factor in this, and I can tell you, many of the discussions I have with customers, or when I go to conferences, I highlight very much that it is a lot about the people, about the humans, about the acceptance of the technology, and the technology, while it's sort of, what do you want to call it, the core of the machine, right? The nucleus, the engine where all the difference comes from, but you need to be aware of the business, the people, the workflows, the responsibilities that they have today, what tasks are changing, what type of skills, new skills do you need. So it has a lot to do with how it changes the organization and the people's responsibilities. Then building trust into the AI technology. So if an AI system tells you every morning whom you should call as a salesperson, well, you better trust the system, because by the end of the year, your commission depends on that type of recommendation, right? So you have that part. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, it's a lot about strategy, and strategy is also in part based on the culture, right? The culture and the values. So, and values are something that the company has to define. Some do it together with the employees, and some do it, depending on how the market is running, but all those types of things.
So my theory is that whatever every company has to do out there has nothing to do about AI, but digitalization. Like, every business model needs to get digital. It needs to be adapted to 21st century. And AI is just a term, a personification, a tool set, but also making it a little bit more real and abstract for a CEO. It's for a CEO easier to say, okay, we want to have AI, whatever it means, then we have to digitalize and do data management and process optimization and so forth. I think it opened up a little bit way more structural problems which we have for all the time. Let's look at automotive industry. Let's look at e-commerce versus stationary, entertainment, media business, etc. We have a couple of minutes left. And I would like to tap a little bit more your brain about, you said something, building something intelligent. Like, this was the core when you studied. What is for you an intelligent system? And like, give us a couple of examples, like from daily life or business life, where you say, hey, that works, that's cool. And, maybe something where you say this failed.
Okay. So first, when I say intelligent system, right, it's really something that I think many in the AI community would say that, you have a system that has some level of awareness of what happens and how you can interact with it, right? So you can start predicting what you're thinking. It can do tasks that you wouldn't expect to do, right, because of the complexities. So that's certainly the fascination. I think if a company claims to have AI or builds AI, whether it's a startup or a big organization, they must have that type of vision in their roadmap. Otherwise, I personally always put a bit of a question mark to it as to whether they are an AI company or whether they want to do automation, which is absolutely completely legitimate, but it's not really then a complete AI company.
Let me jump in. Where do you see
Sure.
the difference between automation and AI?
Oh, I mean, there's a number of, for example, I think there can be many overlaps, but automation and AI, for example, automation, RPA would be a lot of automation. There's a lot of topics about robotics process automation, as you know, and then you have very, very simple scripts, that just do very highly repetitive things, and you and I could program that in a day, right? So that's so simple, let's say, that it's very it has a lot to do with automation and can create value in a short period of time, but you would never call that an intelligent system, right? You would never expect that system to learn so much about its environment and the business that it would be able to self-improve itself, for example.
Does this conflict? Because I feel like, okay, a bot self-executing a script, that's automation. But at the end, I want to have an automated self-learning, self-improvement system, which then needs feedback from me. So therefore, it's not 100% automated, because it would say in 10% of the cases, hey, I have a flag here, please give me feedback so I can self-improve.
So autonomy is an important part, but autonomy doesn't mean that you completely isolate the system from every input around its world, right? Autonomy means that it makes a self-assessment of the knowledge that it has about the world, right? The AI system. So if you give it feedback, and it can evaluate whether that feedback is valuable or not, then you start having a system that is starting to be more autonomous, let's say. But that doesn't mean that you should not, as a human, have an interaction with the system, right? So that's just one point. And I would also like to highlight, there's a few words here like automation. I would often prefer to talk about augmentation too. When you have this human AI collaboration, I think there is so much more happening in this space. And automation sounds so sometimes a bit brutal, right? It says, it's 10,000 people company, now it will be only 100 that run the company. It's not like that, right? Usually it's more like you have augmentation. So you look at opportunities and tasks which can be augmented when you add AI into it. So your partner in crime, like your Knight Rider, your kit, that helps you every day to do something quicker and better, and particularly these mundane tasks, right? Yes. So I think and again, this is a bit the mindset question you mentioned earlier. What don't we do so well? Other cultures sometimes are a little bit more, let's say, successful in creating that bonding between the artificial and what you are doing in your organization.
Like the Japanese cultural
bond? For example. I was thinking pretty much along those lines.
By the way, which is interesting, I think it was in the 60s when Germany and Japan were growing after the Second World War, and both needed labor, and the Japanese said, no, we don't import labor, we build machines. And the Germans said, no, we import them mainly from Eastern Europe, from Turkey, from Spain, from Italy, etc. So a different approach. Germany went brute force and said, we take a lot of humans, uneducated, and the Japanese said, no, different approach. We have one question from Charlie, asking you, with your background in psychology, what are your thoughts around emotion AI?
Yeah, big topic. I think first of all, there's a more basic question. What are emotions required in order to be intelligent, right?
My wife would say, please, no emotions for AI. So
there's no emotions for AI?
No, she doesn't want it. She doesn't want emotional AI. We had this discussion before.
Well, I think they are important. They are definitely an important component of us exhibiting human intelligence. I think we have a lot of gut feel decisions we are making. Many of us have read Daniel.
Is gut feeling emotions? Because privately, emotions are good because it's human. Yeah. But in business, mostly, it's not about emotions, about honestly pure execution and thinking smartly. Like a lot of work is like this. Do I need emotions into a robot who's driving my car? Do I need an emotional car? Or do I just need a very rational, effective system?
But do you think if you were to have rational thinking that anyone would ever start a startup or invest in a startup?
No, the passion is something else. I don't speak about passion. I speak about self-driving car. Do I want an emotional self-driving car? Yes. Or do I like happy, speedy, or self-destroying? Or do I want no emotions? I don't care. Do I need emotions? Let's first, do I need emotions? And second, do we want them? And third, can we do it?
Yeah. So I think you do have some of that. And when you said passion, right? When you have passion, it is quite irrational. I thought, when you start a startup, you need a leap of faith, right? So you need that's much more emotion driven, because you tell yourself it's possible, and the next step will be we will be the winning big next startup.
True, but
so
that's self-lying.
Yeah, and it's a mix between passion, leap of faith. I mean, there's a whole bunch of. I mean, it depends. Now we can have a whole discussion about what emotions.
Again, do I need emotions into an executing machine, an automated machine, in a dashboard or something? Do I need this?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, if you define emotion as something that you would call empathy, for example, and prediction, I mean, these are important aspects that I worked a lot, probably for 7 years, in this human-computer interaction, right? How do you build not just chatbots, but how do they start detecting what your emotional state is, right? And how do they react to it?
I agree. For customer support, I agree. If Facebook needs to know, oh, that's hatred. Yes, the emotion of hatred, it needs to recognize. I agree. But do the AI needs to have emotions itself? Not recognizing, not using it, not playing with it. But do we all want an emotional AI?
I mean, I could think of a lot of industry areas where you need that. Yeah, I mean, when you, for example, look at the elderly homes and healthcare, right? So you know that in the future, nurses. I mean, it's recognition. There is, for example, in the psychology literature, it's practically impossible to be recognizing pure emotions of someone else if you don't live it yourself. So it's very, very hard for you to recognize something that you have no relationship to. So there's a lot of discussion in that space, and for those purposes, I would say there is use in having systems that are emotional. But we could expand a lot.
I know, and we have 1 minute left. But my thought was like, do I need to have a Facebook algorithm who understands hate to block hate in comments? Or does it just need to know, okay, this is hate. I don't care if it's hate or not, but I was taught to flag everything which is hate speech, and I block it, and some human has to give access to it or not.
Again, super complicated question, because I mean, for example, what do you categorize as hate, right? So would it be hate to the majority of people, or would it be who's most inflicted by it? Is it even hate? Would it be tolerable? There are different levels of hate. This is going to open up a whole different chapter.
And then you have a knowledge graph for it in certain degrees, and then you have self-learning systems and improvements and so forth.
But I can say, if I just have a last comment, I mean, when it comes to emotional AI and emotions and AI, this is a long discussion, right? I mean, you find workshops and conferences, and I was in a lot of workshops quite some time ago about creativity, emotions, all these sort of, let's say, softer topics. So it's extremely interesting. I'm more than happy to share.
Is it just thinking about it, or is it actually a real challenge currently? Like, I don't feel that this is real. It's very abstract at the moment.
It's certainly more on the side where it's not the core of sort of business systems, that's for sure. But I think you would be surprised. It's just like, who would have known that these pattern recognition algorithms would have made 100 million euros, to build ads and have this marketing industry popping up, right? So I can see, for example, also in the Corona times and the COVID times, there is already systems which are replicating the way how you interact. So you have your virtual friend, right? And I think there is a market for that, which we have underestimated. There will be more coming in this emotional area.
And we will have more conversations like this, because we just touched the surface. Last question, last statement.
Yeah.
The next decade of AI, what do you see? Like, where will we be in 10 years, and what do we need to achieve, like, today to be there? But give us a vision, give us a positive vision of AI.
Oh, absolutely. I think from my perspective, the next 10 years build up a smorgasbord of many, many different technologies that will become very valuable. You look at I still think natural language processing and machine translation and these types of virtual friends, that will be a big topic. You will start seeing more and more technology pushed into self-driving cars. You have robots that will be introduced to the healthcare space. So I see so many applications now where you have, robots being used in the healthcare space. Then, for example, medical drug discovery. With COVID, I was at the Royal Society of Medicine a couple of months ago, my last trip, overseas before COVID. And there's a lot of discussion on how you can use AI for drug discovery and drug testing and so on. I mean, I think in the best of worlds, I would see AI playing a major role in topics that matter society. Like, for example, and starting to seriously treat diseases like cancer, where it contributes to solving these big nuts, and the big problems that we have in the world, when it comes to transport and safety and so on. So I'm extremely optimistic, and I think every year will bring us more and more exciting applications. So this is like fantastic time to live in. Every year there will be more. I'm without doubt.
I think this is a very good closing statement. So, everyone in the chat, that was Christian Guttmann. And I thank you for this. We will touch again for the summit latest. You can see him live on the summit again. He will have 1 or 2 more gigs. And I thank you for being here today. Yeah.
Fabian, fantastic. Thanks. Great questions. Good chat.
Wonderful. Talk to you again. Bye.
Berlin.
So, I like this because it feels for me a little bit like autumn. That was our virtual chat with Christian. The next one is in 2 weeks, and it will be with Otto John. And Otto John is the former, can call him Chief Innovation Officer at the Bundeswehr. He was running the Cyber Innovation Hub, and he was there for 4 years, and he built from nothing to something. So he will talk about, hey, how do you build in a large corporation, a public corporation, which is not modern, which is very old school? How do you bring in innovation? But how do you also fail because he's not there anymore? He left for cultural reasons. Where is the stop? Where can't you go any further? Where do you need a different skill set also? So I think it will be interesting. Our partner for this episode will be KI Park. I will introduce them a little bit more in detail, but you should check them out, KI Park. They are very supportive, and I'm thankful for them for all the support, especially during Corona. And then, if you haven't checked out, we have a hybrid summit. You will meet, so if you want to meet Christian again in person, you can buy yourself a ticket to be in person. If you want to have more of him online time, you can get a free ticket and stream everything online. And Christian will join us from Sweden to contribute to the good cause, to make AI accessible to everyone. And we'll have an Applied AI Day where we dig deeper into topics we touched today. So I thank you for joining today. It was a pleasure as usual, and I hopefully see you again in 2 weeks and latest for the summit. Bye.